just kind of getting started. I sound about as tired as I feel, unfortunately, but I'm here. So I'm just going to be opening some windows real quickly while I'm waiting to see if anyone decides to stop by. I didn't put my mic down far enough. Sorry about that. So if anyone happens to stop by, please say so in the chat, because I can't see the count, but I can see the chat. So I struggled a lot about what to work on today, because I need John's help with some stuff, basically clarifying some things and making sure some things will work before I can move forward on some things. And so basically what I have is a whole lot of documents that I'm not doing much of anything with at the moment. Mostly like at the moment, as in literally right now. John and I have been working on stuff. He's working on the episode for ethics and morality that we filmed. Followership. I'm trying to decide if I have to give up on what I was pursuing for that and just do the episode and not have the game that I wanted to focus on for it, which is really kind of a bummer. But if I want to ever get the episodes done, I have to move forward. And unfortunately, like, this is the perils of trying to work with like modern games that are like in production and stuff like that are actually innovative and doing new things. Sometimes you can't get access to them. People, it is hard to be kind of a non-entity in games with Leading with Class and not be able to get copies of stuff to look at for the purposes of the show. Hilariously, if I was doing this from the perspective of my other job as a game journalist and where I've reviewed games a couple of times, I could probably get a copy of most games pretty easily, or at least like by paying and having early access or something like that, so long as I agreed to do a review. But I can't agree to do reviews for everything because I am not like capable of the workload that entails. And I try not to have too much cross-pollination between Leading with Class and with Thoughty, my other site where I run stuff. But basically it just means that it's more difficult to get a hold of games sometimes, and people in games are notoriously busy and often working multiple jobs, so stuff like this that is not strictly for marketing them isn't highly prioritized. Like, we've even had people say that we couldn't use art because we have a Patreon and we're not a reviewer site, even though we were talking about like positive things in their game and basically promoting them. And so it's just a little weird. It's just like a difficult situation to be in because I'm not like mad at anyone, obviously, but you know, I also am not sure how to represent these new games from diverse creators and everything like that whenever I can't get access to them. So I guess this is kind of like similar to like people who end up doing work while waiting for other papers to come out. Hey Master, thank you for stopping by. I'm here just detailing why the followership episode is currently a little bit held up. And I'll be deciding what to do about that like this week or something. I just have to talk to John about it and try one last time to get in touch with the person about the game. So, if you happen to know of any games that do a really good job of replicating followership that you'd like me to look at before I finish up the episode, I would be super happy with that. Yeah, production issues are a heck, that's for sure. We haven't run into this much because I keep on trying to stick with like older games that have been out a while, but for the last couple I've really wanted to try and focus on, you know, games that really pay attention to it, to the thing that I'm covering, and things that like aren't covered in older games, like followership is not really common, like as something we really address in other games from the past. So like there's some modern games that do, and I was like, this would be an amazing one to focus on because it really would let me break it down and it would let me, you know, highlight, you know, a newer game. But like unfortunately, like people are busy. You know, like it's a challenging thing. Like it's not an easy thing to get a hold of the stuff. Even if I had asked earlier because of like the state of production and everything the game was in, I don't know if I would have been able to get it even then. So, it's a tricky little wicket, I think. But I worked a little bit last episode of streaming on motivation and empowerment, and so I can today, I think, put some notes down for rewards and recognition. So Manixer says, this is the part where I'd be tempted to point at large-scale professional wargaming. That's a totally different medium. It is a totally different medium. I'm not opposed to talking about it, but I do mostly want to focus on role-playing games. Like, even the video games that I've talked about have mostly been role-playing games. In part because there's a lot more separation from the characters you play and stuff like wargaming. And, yeah. Because it's more than just team-based play. That's right. It's possible that at some point throughout the process of this, I'm going to have to, like, go ahead and just jump out and like, work on something separately. But I want to try and stick with RPGs. Even if it's video games or board games that have a lot of role-playing aspects to them, like if you have a really strong character or whatever. And followership is so hard because it's a lot about like motivations and stuff like that, and like trying to break that down is I think very challenging. So I think before I work on the episode at all, I'm gonna address the question that I got this week. I hope that's okay. And the question that I got is from Arlene Metter, who is a dedicated fan and friend of mine, and always tries to ask good questions, which I appreciate. And Arlene's question was, can you recommend a technique for encouraging quieter players to at least sometimes take a leadership role? Yeah, and this is a hard one. So the hardest thing about this is we all have different perceptions of what we think leadership is and what like a leadership role even is. So like you can almost always honestly get quieter players to do management type stuff, like taking notes or keeping records. You can get them to be responsible for timing things if it's a game that requires like some sort of monitor for time, stuff like that. Like there's almost always a role for a quieter player whenever it comes to like management tasks, because they do like basically like pretty well with passive stuff. But if you're talking about having them like GM, that's a totally different matter. And I think that one of the biggest things with this that you need to do is you need to identify parameters and identify goals. Like, what's the point of getting them to take on the role? Is it so the workload is balanced? Or is it because you want to see what they have to say in a role like that? Or something else? And, like, if it's about workload balance, and they really are just not, like, jamming on the idea of being a GM, it's honestly good to try and do things that involve them, like, picking up the slack in other ways. Having, like, tasks that are shared, and like things like I said, like note taking are really big. Like in games, we don't do that as much as we probably should. And like look at the things that you have required to do around the game table. Like if it's stuff about like in play actually doing leadership stuff, that may be a matter of encouraging them to play characters that are a little bit more confident than them, that have a little bit greater motivation to be a leader than them. Like, a lot of this is starting to look at things like how do you motivate someone to do a, like, activity that is maybe not their favorite thing to do. And so you have to kind of look at what actually would interest them. Like, if you think that a player might actually like being in a leadership role if they were able to be playing, you know, the specific type of character that gets a specific bonus, then you can try and encourage that. If you want them to actually do a GM role, you need to find out, like, what out of character, like, as a player, do they actually want out of the gaming situation? Like, will they actually have fun as a GM? And you can try things like co-GMing, which do shared roles and help balance the workload a little bit. And I think co-GM is really great. It is underrated, I think. And moving towards things like GM-less games, because believe it or not, using a GM-less game can actually encourage people to take leadership roles. Because once the, like, hierarchy is flattened, then when people see a need, they often try to fulfill it. Sometimes it's not their ideal role, but it may be one that they're willing to do for the duration of a short game. So maybe having, like, we need somebody to facilitate this GM-less game, it's kind of low impact, would you mind doing it, is a good approach to someone who's generally quieter and doesn't want to take on a GM role. For in-game, it actually really depends on what kind of game you're playing. If you're playing a game where there's, you know, a lot of opportunities for leadership roles, some of that is just slotting them into it and being like, hey, is it okay? Can you handle this? And getting there okay. And, you know, giving them that role. And then that technically is a leadership role in some cases. Like, say you have a rogue who constantly disclaims responsibility in all of their game experiences. So maybe it's even a player who always plays the rogue because they don't really want to be like the one taking charge. They just want to sneak around the background. And you're like, no, I really want them to actually like take a leadership role and do a thing this time. Well, what you would have to do is find a narrative reason for the rogue to have to take the lead. Yeah, like Manixer says in the chat, it's a very wasn't me kind of attitude. Like they want to like disclaim their responsibility. You need to think of like things like masquerade balls are really good for this because the rogue almost always ends up having to be kind of the face in these things because they're the ones with disguise and stuff like that. Like, look in their character abilities for things that can support taking the lead in a situation. Whether that's you're the only one who can do a proper disguise, or you're the only one who can pickpocket, so you have to go into this situation. Um, Framing it as that, but remembering that it's always okay for somebody to say, no, I don't want to do this, is really important. Because, like, I generally, like, take leadership roles, like, from side to center sort of deal. Like, I rarely actually am the boss or anything like that, even in game. I just end up like taking it over because it's the most convenient thing, or it makes sense for my role or something like that, even though that's what I've been educated to do. And I am not what many people would call an introvert. I'm something mixed. I generally have like mixed involvement with social groups and energy levels and stuff. Um, so, like, sometimes I can be kind of the quieter person, but if you can key into my character's abilities in some way, I'm definitely going to be more likely to take the lead. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Because this is like a really hard question, because you never want to force somebody to do a thing they don't want to do. But we do sometimes want to encourage people into roles that take more authority, take on more responsibility. And that is, it's particularly challenging in a culture like gaming that encourages people to isolate themselves, to be a loner, to be an introvert who doesn't do leadership and stuff like that. I think that there have been a lot of introverted world leaders. Actually, you can read about that a lot. And like, well, personally, I think the introvert extrovert dichotomy is kind of senseless, and it wasn't exactly something Jung was a fan of either, even though he's who it was taken from. I think that the idea behind, you know, people having differing levels of social energy, social engagement, social interest, all three of those things, is real. And that can impact your ability and desire to actually participate as a leader in both fictional worlds and real life. So I think sometimes like the best way to approach it is to find the interests of the person, like find what motivates them to play, what motivates them to engage, and, you know, really make that a kind of carrot on the stick for them, or the actual activator for them. Their catalyst needs to be something that matters to them, because otherwise they're not going to do it, and even if you somehow manage to force them to do it, they are not going to enjoy it. So, obviously consent first, and, you know, try to make sure that someone can actually have any sort of fun in the leadership role that you're trying to assign to them. I hope that was useful. I'm going to go ahead and make some notes in this before I forget. I'm using this list of questions as reference to make like a document at some point in the future, so that's why I'm recording down some of the stuff I am saying. Should have been writing this down while I was talking, because now I forget like half of what I said. I'll remember it later, I hope, but Okay. That is hopefully something useful. I hope that when Arlene gets to watch this, whenever I put it up, that she appreciates what I had to say. So, in the last episode, I worked a bit on motivation and empowerment, just getting some notes down, like stuff that I want to talk about, and some definitions. And this will be it'll inform the following episode on rewards. I'm saying so much. I'm so sorry. So rewards and recognition has like stuff copied into it to give it the right format. Sorry. So, rewards and recognition. Rewards and recognition is like a challenging topic because we have a lot of really complicated reward systems and games, and there's been a ton of research done into rewards and those feedback loops that we can get whenever we give rewards in games. But I don't actually like all of the reward systems we use. And I have to do a little bit of comparing them to my text to see if any of them actually suit that. And so the biggest reward we have in game is typically considered to be XP, experience, from D&D, it's contemporaries, etc. Right, feedback loops are not always the right thing, right? They're not always what we want. And rewards are based on some really specific science sometimes. We really get basically feedback and stuff like that encourages our behaviors. But sometimes rewards are literally just about a feeling of good, a positive feel. And recognition is important too, and we don't do a lot of recognition. The closest thing to recognition we do is stuff like fan mail. Which is a little different. And I'm totally forgetting where in my document, where in my book I can find the rewards section. I know it's in here. I just don't remember where. I'm just trying to see if I'm missing it. Gonna have to search. 207 messages found. That's not a lot or anything. So this is talking a little bit about it. I think it's kind of split out through the text a little bit, which is kind of inconvenient. But so what I'll probably do is tie back to the power episode. To types of power that provide rewards. I wish I could like remember anything in my brain. I'm just gonna pop back to the power episode so I can remember which of the types of power allow you to give rewards. I know reward power, but I think you can also do that with legitimate power, I think. So I'm gonna note that. And then there's the GM to player relationship of giving rewards and recognition, and player to player relationship giving rewards and recognition. I want to talk about kind of maybe rewarding problematic things like violence. Especially in games like D&D that reward for killing pretty much anything. So, for anyone who may be in the chat, I think Mannix are still in there. Are there any experience, rewards, recognition type stuff in games that you think are particularly interesting that might be worth me taking a look at while I work on this? To maybe mention the episode. Preferably finished games that are available for purchase or free. Because obviously I'm not familiar with everything. And like, so I like Karma, the reward in Shadowrun 3rd edition specifically. And I talk about Shadowrun 3rd edition a lot, but that's because it has a lot of good design ideas. But the reason why I like it is because it can be broadly applied to get stuff out of it. You can use it for leveling, you can use it for like contacts and all that stuff. But I also like it because it's given for like behaviors in game too. Not like stuff like fan mail is and everything, but like if you choose to not like, or if you try really hard and don't kill anybody during a run, you can get more karma for that. It's hard to obtain, but it's nice. and it's a positive kind of reward to me. And like there's like different kinds of things that you can get it for. And I liked that it has a little bit more variety in, you know, than like XP where you just get it for killing people. And then like we have some indie games, especially like Powered by the Apocalypse, where you have XP just for like using a stat that others want to see you use. So that would be DA XP for marked stats. But also for relationship currency like strings, and I can't remember what else you can get. What else you can get stuff for? What else you can get experience for? In PBTA games, just off the top of my head. And then there's like corruption, which is like an anti-reward, sort of, which encourages you. I guess corruption would probably fit. Corruption in Urban Shadows would fit under the rewarding problematic things. Kind of you pursue your monstrous nature, I think. It would help if I could remember anything. But yeah, I think that those are a couple of things that I want to touch on, because like the way there's obviously been a lot of gamification research on rewards and recognition, but like I need to tie, you know, these different types of XP to, you know, my leadership studies, and some of that is easier, some of that is harder. And it is like there's a lot to be said for how like my text does focus a lot on focusing on empowerment instead of just reward, which is a big deal. But I think I'm gonna do a little bit more research and see what I can find, because Daft is a really good base text, but I could use a little bit of boosting for this particular thing because it's so well researched in games. I can't assume that Daft is covering a fair amount of what is being researched about it, because I know that research on rewards and recognition is extensive and massive. So I'm probably going to finish up in a few minutes. If you're in the chat, if you have a question, please feel free to ask. I would really appreciate the opportunity to answer any of your questions, because I am trying to ensure that I do that every time I do one of these, is that I ask everyone if they have any questions. So if you have any questions about what I'm talking about for the episode that I'm looking at, about my earlier question from Arlene, or anything else, that happen to come up or that you've been thinking about. So long as it has connection to leadership in games, I'd love the chance to give it some thinking. I'm just making some notes here about recognition. So the two relationships here that I noted, the GM to player and player to player relationship, some games allow for players to give rewards and recognition to other players. Some games do not. And I think that is something that kind of mimics the way we sometimes allow people to give each other feedback in the workplace and sometimes don't. And like other environments, like whenever you are in a place with a group, sometimes you have like one central friend, like one person in your social group who will like dispense feedback and stuff to other people, or like kind of authorize it. It's a really weird phenomenon that I've seen. And I think it kind of mimics the GM relationship. And it'll be something like where there's like the one person in your group who can talk to everybody about everything. So whenever something positive or negative comes up, everybody's like, hey, why don't you tell Benjamin that like he can do this kind of thing. And it's also a weirdly like parental kind of vibe at times, the way we have like only the GMs can dole out recognition or reward in any way. Where it's like, it reminds me of the like chore chart that I had when I was a kid, and like if I did enough of it, I'd get a reward, right? But the only person who could give me the reward was my mom or my dad, typically my mom. And like whenever I see like a lot of XP systems that can be like rewarded, they're things that like can only be given out based on like the one authority's decision, and that's kind of how it feels like. Like I've done my chores, I was a good boy, can I please mom have my lollipop? And that's how it feels. And I think I prefer personally like a mode where like we can be giving each other feedback in multiple directions. So it's not just one person who has the authority to say you did a good job or not. It may take a greater command of rules, or something like that, but there's nothing wrong with that. So oh, super sorry. I've only been going for like 40 minutes, but I don't have a lot of content today because I need to check with John on like 32 things, and because I am not feeling super great. So I think one thing that I will do is quickly pop over. I did want to go over the just basically stuff that I want to talk about in table topics, which is another type of episode I'm looking to do to give John a little bit more opportunity to do like graphics and stuff, and to talk about things in a more lightweight way, maybe. We'll see how it goes. It's called Table Topics, and it's a discussion topic series where I'll be covering like individual ideas as opposed to full concepts or categories of stuff. So like if I were to do a power episode of Table Topics, I would literally talk about what is power, what does power mean, and that's it. For the episodes that I'm looking at doing right now, I want to cover topics like consent and failure, caring and trust, competition and cooperation as 2 separate episodes. Things like creativity, kind of looking at like, you know, what is it to be creative, and like how does that matter to a leader. Then like winning, and like in games a lot of the time there's ideas about winning and losing and stuff like that, and like how we should approach that as leaders. And love versus fear. And that one may be a slightly GM centric episode, we'll see. But it is something that I do want to talk about, because like the love versus fear approach to leadership is really important, and I think that it's underrated as one that we talk about. So I want to like do a brief episode to talk about that. These won't be started until after we finish season 1. Once we finish season 1, I want to try and record a couple of these in a row, and give John time to work on those and release them interspersed with the episodes of season 2 as we move into those. So we'll see how it goes. I'm excited about them because like I want the opportunity to tackle some of these simple topics, and like I want them to be really approachable, and like I'd love so much to see them like shared around and like focused on. But some of them I have to do a little bit more research for, even though they're super simple, because they need to come with some like references and stuff. So and like these are things that are only vaguely covered by Daft for the most part. And finding like good resources for some of them, like caring, can be challenging because some of the major resources for caring ethics in leadership are ones I wasn't a huge fan of, and some are problematic in nature. So like, as it is always with leadership, you have to kind of sift through to find the right option for your research, because you want it to be accurate, you want it to be correct. But because a lot of this is theoretical, and a lot of it is like based on like personal perspective of the, you know, the person bringing up the theory, like you have to be selective. You have to check their background to make sure they're not terrible people and stuff like that. But still like find the value where it's available. But those are the table topics we're going to work on. And we literally only have like 3 or 4 episodes left of season 1. And every bit of support is appreciated. We did submit to the Vlogbrothers sponsorship because I was like, if we had like a better camera and we had better equipment and we had, you know, a fair number of things to help us with this, we'd be able to do the show a lot better and a lot more. It could make it a lot easier on John doing a lot of the production work, particularly if his computer wasn't constantly crashing and stuff like that. So that's one of those things that we're working on. And we'll see if there's a way to make this continue and succeed. Um, I really love the show, and I hope that you do too, and that you'll enjoy seeing more of it as we make more of it. With that in mind, if you're on here and you do not support us on Patreon, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/leadingwithclass. And you can follow us on Twitter at leadingwclass and on Instagram at leadingwithclass. And I do try to do these streams like once a week on Wednesdays. What time of day depends on my health. But I've been aiming for earlier in the day. And I normally do up to an hour, but around 45 minutes to an hour is around the window there. And I'll do more if I have more questions from viewers. And, you can check out some of the past episodes on our YouTube, which we do not have a vanity URL for yet. But you can find it through the Patreon. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up. Unless any of you all have any questions. So I will wait a minute while I drink some tea and let that lag catch up. And if you have any questions, I'll respond. So you have been gone, Minister. I wondered where you went. It still said you were here, but I couldn't see you. I am just in the Q&A portion. If you have any questions, I went over a little bit of what table topics were, and I talked a little bit about the rewards and recognition episode. And I did say that I submitted to the Vlogbrothers Scholarship, which, if that could at all help us to get to the point where John's computer's not crashing all the time, that would be amazing. Followership, leadership outside a hierarchical context. So a lot of the time, Manixer asks, followership / leadership outside a hierarchical context. Hierarchical. I can't pronounce that word. But you know what I mean. Without a hierarchy. So it can exist. It does exist, honestly. Because one, we naturally create a lot of we create hierarchy where there is none a lot of the time. Unless you have distributed leadership, if you have a group and there is a leader, there is a hierarchy. It may be a short hierarchy, but still hierarchy. So if we only play GM-less games as a group, right? But someone always is the facilitator and knows how all the games are run, that has created a hierarchy. And this isn't necessarily bad. But say instead we rotated who brought games and who was in charge of running, who was in charge of facilitating. Once you split that out, then there's no longer a kind of default hierarchy of one higher, the rest lower. And I think that followership tends to happen even whenever we're just friends sometimes, because there is power imbalance kind of naturally. Basically there's too many aspects of power and too many aspects of authority and privilege and responsibility in every relationship to say that they are ever entirely free of hierarchy. Like in groups, like in like a couple, there can probably be like an equal environment. But like whenever we have groups, like it's almost impossible to avoid that, like that imbalance creating hierarchy. And that's how followership happens whenever you don't have a official leader. You'll have people who know that that person's like the social leader because they're the best liked and da, da, da. And exactly, yes, it's not so much a formal hierarchy thing as a navigating power relationships thing. That is exactly it. Because I mean, even in like my close friends relationship, so I have my normal game group is me, John, my friend Ed, and my friend TJ. So all three of them are cis men. And John is almost always our GM or the leader of the games. So like he facilitates pretty much everything. Even though I am the designer for one of the games that we run. Weirdly, even though TJ has, he's a cis guy and everything, he actually typically has less like social hierarchy because I have the role of designer and have created the games that he's playing and have more knowledge about the ones that he's been playing at our house. This is no like personal judgment. This is literally just like if somebody were analyzing our group in this way. And Ed is familiar with a lot of games, but has never taken a particular leadership role. So he doesn't really have a position higher or lower than me in any particular way. His forced personality is stronger than both mine and TJ's. And then John always like running the games and also being a cis guy and also having a pretty strong sense of authority because it's his house most of the time. Like it creates a weird hierarchy that we didn't actually make because of powered relationships. And none of us have any negative stuff towards each other at all in this. Like we all actually get along incredibly well, which I super like. But were something to go wrong, like it could easily fall out that me or TJ would be the ones to, kind of have the fallout because we're the ones with the greatest risk. Even though Ed is, I think, the only other queer person at the table, he doesn't, because he's like a white cis guy, he doesn't really experience any negative trauma from that at the time. So like, yeah, it's this weird, like there are inherent power structures that we don't always understand and don't always recognize until we evaluate them. And they change sometimes. So that is how like I tend to follow what John says, and so do TJ and Ed. But people are more likely maybe to go towards like my needs because I, well, one, it's my house. Two, I often arrange all of the events. Like I schedule everyone to get together and stuff like that. So that gives me position of authority over the goings on. So it's interesting, I think, to see who would like end up following rules based on like just a social group whenever we don't technically have a hierarchy. Aside from John sometimes running the games, for the games that have had GMs. But like we play a lot of board games. We played Roar of Alliance, which doesn't have a GM. But there's implicit social hierarchies. So that's how followership and leadership kind of come into play inadvertently, in like a non-hierarchy kind of environment. I hope that was actually clear and useful. I haven't ever had to explain that out loud before, so I hope I did okay. But yeah, I think it's very interesting, and I think that everybody's is a little different. You're welcome. I'm glad that it was useful and that it was able to be understood. Did you need any clarification, or are we good to go? Awesome. Awesome. Well, with that in mind, it's now 2:15 and I would like a break. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up. I really appreciate you stopping by, everyone who has, and I hope that you enjoyed my stream, and that you'll check out Leading with Class at patreon.com/leadingwithclass. And yeah. Thank you so much. I didn't mean to pause. I just had to ban somebody from my my Twitch chat. I apologize. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.